A-Fest. I have to say, I get it. I didn't know what to expect, but we've been here the whole time, as you heard, my wife and I really appreciate this beautiful community, and the mission is incredibly well aligned with my own. So it's a great privilege to speak to you, and also to talk about a topic, longevity. You'll understand what this means in a little bit, which I have been thinking about my entire career, and you'll see how it's related to my work, but I have never talked about this as a topic. And so I just want to begin with a little perspective about what we think of when we hear the word longevity, what most people think of. They think of living longer, right? This is sort of the definition in many ways. But I could tell you for 25 years, I've been studying the aging brain, and for 25 years, I've been writing that the sole goal of living longer is a hollow pursuit. This is especially true when it comes to the brain. We know that there's a near ubiquitous level of cognitive decline that we suffer as we get older that diminishes the quality of our lives. And then there is the epidemic level of the devastating effects of Alzheimer's disease and other causes of dementia. This is the reality. I've spent my entire clinical career as a neurologist managing the consequences, the negative consequences of humanity's pursuit of living longer. And I've always said, since the very beginning when I started, when I was 25 years old, that the goal is really about living better, longer. Now, in preparation for this talk, as you heard, I decided to push out of my comfort zone and not give you my standard spiel, but ask some seniors in my life, mentors, friends that I have that are in their 70s, what longevity means to them, because maybe it's not just about this. And I found out that that was true. They didn't actually talk a lot about longer. Matter of fact, longer never came up. They didn't really talk about better. What they talked about was now, which surprised me. Here's a quote that was told to me from my friend. He said, longevity is about living in the now, in the moment. This person is Mickey Hart. Does anyone know Mickey Hart here? So Mickey Hart is the drummer from this band, the Grateful Dead. Legendary band, been around for 50 years. And so Mickey Hart, gives, that's the first words out of his mouth when I ask him what he thinks about longevity. But then it gets much more interesting than that. And he tells me about something called nunkstance. Does anyone here know what nunkstance is? Okay, imagine existing for eternity, watching all of history play out forever. That's not nunkstance. Nunkstance is essentially the opposite of that. It's the idea of experiencing all of time in a single moment that lasts forever. It is the eternal now. And I have to say, I've had the pleasure and the privilege of being on stage and watching this 74-year-old ecstatically play drums to a rapturous audience of thousands. That is living in the now. That is longevity, right there. And so that was a really profound sort of reorientation of thinking about something that I've been working on for so long. I also realized, as I was researching for this talk, that all of these aspects, these perspectives on longevity, really all have a common ingredient. And that ingredient is experience. And I could spend an entire hour on this slide, and you've already heard a lot about it. So I just want to point out a couple of elements about each of these. But there's extensive evidence that living longer is associated with social interactive experiences. You've already heard about this, and that data is really quite convincing. Also, in many ways, but in one interesting way, that experiential purchases, buying experiences like this, lead to better and longer quality lives than material purchases. And then when it comes to the now, that sort of elusive concept of nunkstance I was talking about, neuroscience has shown in extensive research that focusing on experience itself slows down the perception of time. So if you want to live longer, it seems like longer life, it seems like a good idea to start by actually paying attention to it, right? That's the first pathway. If you pay attention to your life, you're already living longer. Experience is also important in another way, and now I'm going to get more into my work itself. Experience is the gateway to our brain's plasticity, right? That wondrously complex dance of change that occurs in all of our brains all the time, at every level, its structure, its chemistry, its physiology, all in response to experiences. This is the entire basis of all of learning. And it's also the opportunity to enhance our cognition. Now, why do we want to enhance our cognition? Right? As a species, we're actually doing fairly well. So if you look across the last century, our lives on this planet have improved in so many ways. So on average, right now, we are healthier. we're less poor, we're more literate, we're less violent, and relevant to this discussion, we're longer living. How are we doing in terms of improving our cognition? And I want to be clear here. When I say cognition, I'm not talking about information or knowledge or skills. I'm talking about the core of what makes us human. How our brains interact with our environment, how we perceive the world around us, integrate that information through thinking and feeling, and then respond to it. The abilities of attention, perception, memory, decision-making, reasoning, imagination, creativity, emotional and aggression regulation, and then empathy, compassion, wisdom. In those regards, we are actually tragically lacking. So much so that I would say that we're experiencing a crisis right now, a crisis of our minds, what I call a cognition crisis. We know that anxiety, depression, deficits of attention and memory inflict 100 billion people across this planet right now, with economic costs in the trillions. Even if you look outside of the medical domain and look in other aspects of cognition, we see that creativity is declining in children, an increase in things like narcissism. So we're at a very critical point right now where we're not, I would say, evolving our minds along with how we've been evolving other things like technology. And I would put the goal of enhancing cognition as a big, grand global challenge, right up there with the other pressing global priorities. Because if we can't learn to sustain our attention better and to make wiser, more creative, more future-oriented decisions that prioritize others rather than ourselves, we'll never, ever manage other complex time-delayed crises like those affecting our climate. So it's critical that we think about how to enhance our cognition. One opportunity, the one that I'm exploring, is technology. Now, before I tell you about all the promise I see in using technology as a tool to enhance our cognition, I do have to pause and tell you that technology has challenged our brains in very, very many fundamental ways. So I wrote a book last year called The Distracted Mind: Ancient Brains in a High-Tech World. I'm not going to be talking to you about this at all today, but it is an evolutionary perspective on the strengths and weaknesses of the human brain and how technology hasn't created a lot of the challenges that we face, but it has certainly aggravated it. Another wise friend of mine, Jon Favreau, the writer, producer, actor, Hollywood guy, he said to me in an interview that we did on virtual reality and storytelling that I want to find the humanity in the technology. And this is actually a really important conversation that's going on in Silicon Valley right now. How do we think from the very earliest stages? It doesn't mean you can't make profit as a company, but how do you think about developing technologies that enhance what makes us human, not diminish us? And I think that that is a really important point. And when we look back in time, I expect that right around now is when we're seeing that transition. And it is an important time to have that conversation, because we have the consumerization of technologies such as virtual reality, augmented reality, motion capture, wearable and smart physiological devices, and then, of course, machine learning and artificial intelligence algorithms. These will have a profound impact on how we interact with our environment, with each other, and with ourselves. So it's really a great opportunity to get out in front of it. Most of this technology is being developed for entertainment, media, and communication purposes. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but there is this really exciting possibility of using this technology to enhance cognition. And that's what I want to tell you a little bit more details about. For the last decade, I've been thinking, how can we create new technologies or leverage existing ones to enhance our cognition, refine our behavior, and ultimately to elevate our minds so that we can live longer, better lives in the now. So how do we do that? Well, we know that technology, not just this exciting new technology, but the ones that we all carry in our pockets, create experiences for us. And I already told you the power of experience in changing our brains. But not all experiences are created equal. The experiences that I'm most interested in to accomplish this really high-level goal is what we call closed-loop experiences in our work, closed-loop systems. I want to be really explicit about what this is. This is sort of the most important takeaway I have. A closed-loop system is where you intervene or interact with the environment in some way and record the impact with as low latency as possible. So ideally, in real time, you're knowing what sort of influence you're having. You use that data and then refine your intervention. So if what you were doing was not enough, you apply a little more. If it was too little, you pull back a little bit. You apply it, you record, you refine, you apply, cycling over and over again. At each pass through the closed loop, you're becoming more targeted and personalized to affect the outcome that you want. Now, we have closed-loop systems all throughout our physical world. As a matter of fact, our modern-day appliances are full of them. The thermostat you use to regulate your temperature, even modern-day dryers detect the amount of moisture in your clothing in a closed loop and then decide when that cycle is done. But in the biological world, we have almost no examples of it. And there's not a single closed-loop system for improving the human mind that exists right now. So how do we create closed-loop experiences using technology to improve cognition? Many possible ways, but the one I became interested in was how do we build video games in closed-loop systems? Now, you know video games. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with them. Very powerful form of interactive media. They are completely global. You might not be aware, but the amount of the population balance, much like AFIST, is actually biased towards more women than men that play video games. And the age of the average gamer is now very close to 40, and not just for young gamers like myself becoming older, but the field has matured. They've learned how to focus on different populations and create enjoyable experiences. But there's really no closed-loop video games out there. So let me show you what that looks like right now in this cartoon. So you're playing a game, and of course it's your brain that's playing the game, and your behavior is creating performance metrics all the time, how fast you are, how accurate you are. The sensors in our devices, like the accelerometer and the tap screen in a tablet, can record your performance in real time and then feed back an updated environment immediately that's personalized to you. And we could change two things when we update the environment. One is the challenge, so that you're not so frustrated because it's too hard or bored because it's too easy. Just put right in that perfect flow state. And we think this is the ideal way to harness plasticity. So you're pushing the system, but not so hard that it just breaks. The other thing we could give you in real time is rewards and feedback. And every game designer in the world knows that you create deep immersion in gameplay through real-time feedback. And that's what we want here. So the mechanics of the game we could use to challenge your brain in a very selective way, and then through the closed-loop feedback of challenge and reward, we could create an environment to harness plasticity to improve the brain. The other cool thing about this little cartoon and this system here is that it perfectly accepts those other forms of technology that I talked about that are just emerging right now. So for example, motion capture devices, physiological recording you could put in a watch. You could buy both of these on Amazon right now. These are consumer devices already. They can record more details about you in the moment and then feed that into the software engine. Likewise, we could use tools like augmented and virtual reality to create even more real-world immersive experiences that we think will also generate greater change. And we could wrap this all together with the advances that are occurring in machine learning and other AI systems to create a truly integrated multimodal closed-loop system. This does not exist right now, but this is the very near future, and I think will show it's a powerful way of improving the brain function of people who are healthy, as part of education, as part of wellness, people of any age, and as a new approach to medicine. So what better use can there be for AI, which is needed to manage this complex closed-loop system, than to promote HI, right? Artificial intelligence to improve human intelligence. I think that is the most important thing we could do with all this amazing new technology. All right, let's step a little further into the story by telling you my first foray into this world, which occurred a decade ago. 2008, I had the idea of building a closed-loop video game to improve what we call cognitive control abilities in older adults. So for decades, I've been studying aging. I know, and we all know in the field, that as we get older, our attention, our working memory, holding information in mind for a short period of time, our ability to multitask declines as we get older. So I had this idea of building a closed-loop video game to challenge one of those aspects of cognitive control, because we also know that the neural networks that are involved in allowing you to do any of them are very overlapping. So the hypothesis was, if we could improve your ability to deal with interference, we would improve your attention and your working memory. And so I reached out to friends of mine in the video game world. We didn't have the capabilities at our laboratory at UCSF to build a video game, and we created NeuroRacer, friends from LucasArts. This is what NeuroRacer looks like. You're driving a car along a road, trying to maintain your position up, down, left, right, keeping your car in that sweet spot, and then you respond as rapidly and accurately to signs, like that green circle, but not green pentagons, not green circles, not green pentagons, which are very hard not to respond to. So what's going on there is that we have two independent closed-loop systems that are running on adaptive staircase algorithms. That means that as you drive the car and as you do the sign task and get better and better, they get harder and harder. Now, if you were to play this, you would really trade off between these tasks, even if you didn't know you were doing it. It's very hard, virtually impossible for our brain to actually parallel process two attention-demanding tasks like those. So what we did, because we want you to try to push your brain to do that, not because we want to make you better at texting and driving, let's say, but we think that it will have benefits on other abilities that use the same networks. We simply tether across them with a reward cycle. That means that you do not level up in NeuroRacer unless you get better at both driving and the sign task as you move from session to session. And one thing we learned is that everyone, including 90-year-olds, want to level up in video games. It's just an innate part of being a human. And so we take advantage of that, capitalize on that desire to improve. And that's what NeuroRacer looks like. All right, I'm not going to show a lot of data, but I do have to show just one data piece of a slide here. So what we wanted to show is that we could use this video game as both a cognitive and neural diagnostic in addition to a tool to improve cognition. So what you're looking at here is multitasking performance on NeuroRacer itself. The red line means that you multitask perfectly. You could do that sign task just as well when you do it alone compared to when you're driving at the same time. The first thing we asked is what happens across the lifespan. We do not have data on how multitasking changes across the lifespan. Now, at least in San Francisco, 20-year-olds are convinced that they are multitasking masters, right? They practice it all day long. They're going to get a complete 0%. They have no multitasking cost that they suffer. But that's not true. We find there's a 27% decrement in performance in 20-year-olds. Now, we already know through dozens of research papers that we published that once we hit our 70s and 80s, our multitasking ability is significantly reduced to that of 20-year-olds. What we didn't know is what happens in the middle. Do you just like maintain at this plateau only to plummet in one tragic year when you're 69? Or as our data shows, do you plummet every tragic year of your life? So that's the reality. These types of abilities like multitasking, like selective attention, like processing speed in general, resistance of distraction, are actually not preserved throughout our lives. They really hit a pinnacle. If you look at 12-year-olds, they sort of look like 40-year-olds. It goes up, and then it declines. You actually don't have very long time at this plateau. So who here is 23 years old? 22, 23. OK, you enjoy yourself right now. You're really at the pinnacle of this mountain. OK, the other thing we did, and I'm not showing you this data, is that we recorded brain activity during gameplay. And we showed that neural networks involving the prefrontal cortex, the most evolved part of our brain, are responsible for this decline. We then did the intervention study where we had older adults play NeuroRacer for 1 month, brought them back into the lab. So that was 1 hour a day, 3 days a week for 4 weeks. They come back into the lab and we see what happens. And this is what we find. They multitask way better on the game after just 12 hours of engagement, even exceeding that of 20-year-olds. And we show that their prefrontal cortex networks are much more robust. They activate earlier. They have a larger network of the brain that's involved in it. But most importantly, we confirmed our hypothesis. We showed that these older adults pay better attention on very different tasks from after to before, actually holding faces in mind, which is nowhere part of the game. And their memory and their ability to sustain their attention on very boring tasks also improve. A control group that also played NeuroRacer, but in single tasking mode, they didn't show any benefits. It wasn't just 12 hours of gameplay. The active ingredient here was this interference challenge. And so we published this at the end of 2013 in this journal, Nature. It was the cover of the journal in September 2013. This is like being on Rolling Stone magazine cover for us scientists. And we show here that we can work with professionals in another industry, video game professionals, to create an entirely new type of interactive experience, which neither group could do alone, and then do very careful, well-controlled study to show that we could lead to this type of improvement that we also show sustained 6 months later. Now, we'll never move technology from the entertainment world into medicine and education unless we do this type of approach. High-level tech development coupled with high-level research. And so where do we go from here? Well, my laboratory at UCSF transformed. No one wanted to do standard basic cognitive neuroscience anymore. We all want to do this type of what we call translational neuroscience, where our primary goal is to improve people's lives, both through new types of assessments and new types of treatments using technology. So we say that our mission is bridging that gap that exists between technology, and I'm talking about non-invasive consumer-facing technologies, and neuroscience. Now, I don't have time to, usually I could give an hour talk on all that we do at Neuroscape, including the type of assessments that we create, the mobile brain recordings, the brain stimulation work that we do. But I just want to just mention all these new experiential treatments that we've created. So for the last 5 years, we've been building these: Body Brain Trainer, Engage, Rhythmicity, Virtual Tension, Labyrinth, Metatrain. The world has not seen any of these yet, but we've been building them. These are interactive experiences. All of them we bring on high levels of art, music, story, and reward. They all target different aspects of cognition, and they take lessons that already exist in the world. So we have meditation-inspired video games, those that bring in elements of rhythm and music, physical fitness. And then we use all those other tools, from virtual reality to motion capture to physiological recording playing into gameplay. Now, as excited as we are about all of these, where we think we will ultimately have the biggest impact on improving the function of our minds is when we stop building silos around each of them, as we've done in the drug world, but look at how they interact together. And that's something we're very excited about. We call it neuro-CrossFit training. And so here is our vision of the future. You get a personalized assessment that will give you a set of these treatments that will start personalized because we targeted them for you and then change in a closed loop over time. And so now that we've built them, we're doing very, very deep dive studies into figuring out how they work, who they work best in, before anybody sees them, before we pass them out into the world. And so if you were in one of our studies, you would get an MRI, an EEG, stress testing, cognitive testing, mood evaluation. We do blood work looking at hormone levels, telomere length, inflammatory markers. Anything that we believe can change before and after an interactive experiential treatment like this, we record. And those are done as randomized, double-blinded controlled trials. So that's another advance that we've made, is moving our methodology into the world that's accepted by regulators and physicians and practitioners of how they think about treatments. And so that's something that we're quite excited about. I want to tell you about one other technology just very briefly. What you're looking at here we call the glass brain. This is actually my brain. It was captured with both MRI, so the cortical surface is in blue, the golden fibers we call the white matter, and then integrated with this is real-time EEG captured with multi-electrode electroencephalography recording with multiple processing going on within 0.2 of a second, visualizing the different rhythmic oscillations of my brain activity. And then with a joystick, because we bring all this data into our video game engine, you could essentially just fly right through your own brain. If you happen to be the one wearing the EEG cap, it's quite surreal to watch your brain watching itself. But this is the type of technology that we're now developing, moving beyond the proof of concept stage to say, can we have new real-time diagnostics of how brains are functioning? We actually have a virtual reality version of this. We almost brought this on this trip. Joe does a pretty cool demo of this, where you can, for example, as a therapist, see someone else's brain while they're in an interactive experience, and then with a virtual dashboard, push on the challenges, then fly over to that prefrontal cortex, see how it's responding. I don't know if this will happen enough, but it is an interesting idea, not really so far out of our technical capabilities. But where we're spending our most time with the glass brain is to feed neural data during gameplay into the game engine itself. Now the game is not just giving you challenges or feedback based upon your performance metrics, like how fast or accurate you are, it's doing it based upon how your brain is processing information. So using machine learning, if there's a deficit that is noticed, it could give you rewards and challenges based upon that. We think this is going to be like a surgical approach, like a gamma knife of taking this technology and using it to refine and improve performance and cognition in general. We also have studies using this type of data to feed in and guide the stimulation parameters on transcranial alternating current stimulation. That's a very fancy way of saying that we stimulate your brain with electrical currents. We actually have 2 papers and a third on its way showing that we can accelerate the learning curve on a game by stimulating your brain electrically, non-invasively, with a current you can't even really feel. Pretty crazy stuff. But if you have a traumatic brain injury, right now there's really nothing that we do for you. In the future, you could imagine a personalized treatment like this, coupled with the type of new approach to neurofeedback I described, and brain stimulation that accelerates the plasticity. So completely new types of medicines. Raging against aging. Why do I say that? Well, you know, getting healthier older is an active process. We don't have magic pills. Here's one of our older participants, a 70-year-old, playing Body Brain Trainer. I just love this. I mean, this is like, I could literally watch this all day on just a short loop. So what happens in Body Brain Trainer is that you respond to cognitive challenges, but motion capture is sensing the movement of your body. This gentleman is also wearing a heart rate monitor. So in addition to the game challenging him cognitively right at his sweet spot, it's also moving the demands, his physical demands based on his heart rate. So if his heart rate is below goal, the game just automatically in real time increases the amplitude of his movements, driving his heart rate up. If it's too high, it just pulls it down. So this is just a little video I haven't showed before of what sort of goes on at our laboratory when we're doing experiments. I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs, CEOs, business people in the room, so I'm going to conclude by telling you about two companies that I've started. One is pretty far along. We just finished our Series C funding. The other, we just finished our seed funding. But it's both in this domain. So everything I told you about are research projects from our laboratory. Unfortunately, none of it is available yet. I know that question will be coming up. But we are very rapidly trying to move this technology and this science from our research center at UCSF into the real world. And so two companies, Gazzaley. This is our longer-standing company, started in 2008. I'm a co-founder, started also with friends from the video game industry, including those folks that helped us build NeuroRacer from LucasArts. And Gazzaley is a very interesting company. Also, you cannot buy any of Gazzaley's products yet. This is sort of a polarizing part of the talk. So what Gazzaley is doing, they licensed the first patent that I filed behind our first game, NeuroRacer, right? We now have 8 patents. You can't actually write a patent about a video game, but you can patent the underlying methodology, what we consider the game engine. And so I'm the inventor. My university is the owner. That's sort of our relationship. And Gazzaley has an exclusive license to this first patent. Now, instead of putting it out on the consumer space, even based on our Nature paper, we made the decision to not do that because we want to advance an entirely new type of product into the world. And we consider that digital medicine. So right now, we have pharmaceutical medicines that deliver molecular treatments, right? We've been doing that for 60 years. Our entire mental health care system is based upon that approach. As a matter of fact, some people, you can ask them what medicine is, and they will say drugs. That is not true. That is some really very clever, long-standing marketing. Right? A medicine is an approach to improve your health, and it could be anything. So these digital medicines are now going through multiple clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, and now phase 3 trials to determine, can we have a positive clinical benefit on individuals suffering from all of these different conditions. I don't have time to tell you about all of these, but I could tell you that the one that has raised the most interest and that you will certainly be hearing about within the next year is our completion of a phase 3 double-blinded randomized control trial to use the treatment that we call EVA, which derived from NeuroRacer, to treat attention deficits in children diagnosed with ADHD. We announced in December that we hit our primary outcome. So that study was the first of its kind, a 20-site study, 350 kids, done exactly like a drug trial. And so what we actually are just now submitting this to the FDA for approval, and what we're looking at now is the first non-drug treatment ever approved by the FDA, the US agency to treat ADHD, and the first prescribable video game. So very soon, very soon. If it's this year, it'll be a 10-year story. Next year, 11 years. But hopefully you'll be seeing that soon. We have very low side effect profile, as you might imagine. Only one dropout in a study, which is unheard of. And that side effect profile was? Addiction. Frustration. It's hard to play these games. We actually don't have addiction as a side effect because what we do is we limit the amount of game time using the software. So in our study, an 8-year-old that's engaged in the study can only play the game for 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week for 1 month, and that dosage is over. So unlike traditional pharmaceutical medicines, we could prevent overdose, and we could also monitor compliance remotely. Right? There's a lot more to tell you, so I'm going to move on. I just want to tell you about the newest company. We're really excited about it. I've never actually talked about this before. It's called SenSync. It stands for sensory synchronization. It's different than Gazzaley, but what we're doing here is we're trying to create an entire new virtual reality. So picture having stimulation in an environment that you could see, hear, smell, and feel a personalized nature experience. I call this a deep brain massage, a new type of restorative experience. And of course, we have the ability to record physiology so we could create a closed loop nature experience using all this stimulation. So we think that this might have the potential to be in spas as a new type of way of improving and restoring your mind. I mean, I could tell you that Achilles treatments exhaust your mind. This is sort of the flip side of it. The other thing that I'm really interested in is how can this lead to transformative experiences? Sort of like now we're seeing with the use of like psilocybin and other psychedelics have therapeutic effects. So still open-ended area of discussion. I just want to close with another Nunc Stans quote that I found since I discovered this, which was just a couple months ago. This quote says, "The now that passes produces time, the now that remains produces eternity." And with that, I'd like to thank you all for your attention.